matters. The jury trials in Orleans Parish have finally resumed. We're very grateful to see that happen. A major part of the criminal justice system is back and functioning again. We do anticipate that that's a critical step towards making the city safer, towards consequences for individuals who are creating criminal activity, and we look forward to seeing that process continue. Last but not least, I'm assuming we're going to get some questions on this, so I'll just jump on this one ahead of time. When it comes to second lines and the details around that, specifically the second line parades this weekend and next and going forward, we want to be clear that the enforcement activities, the regulations and the guidelines that we're referring to here, this is not intended to be punitive in any way. It's not intended to single anybody out. This is really, as we have said throughout this season, going back to Crew of Boo last fall, all these decisions, all these conversations are had in relation to the bandwidth that we have available. Right now, NOPD has 1,024 officers. That has an effect. Regardless of anything else that we want to do or not do, we have to work with the numbers that we have. In this specific instance, it does mean that conversations were had with the parading crews ahead of time. We didn't want to get out in front of anybody or surprise anybody on the day of. Wasn't trying to be a gotcha, weren't trying to bust anybody. We just needed the crews to work with us and understand the resources that we had available. To that end, the NOPD and One Stop did attempt to have some meetings about this going back as far as December. Unfortunately, that meeting that was called was very sparsely attended. So then after Mardi Gras last week on Wednesday, NOPD and One Stop again did meet with some club heads and some parade organizers, and they're going to continue to do that. But the message on this is that we're not trying to shut anybody down. We're certainly not trying to tamp down the culture or to ruin anybody's good time. We're really just trying to work with the numbers that we have available, and we want to work with the parade crews, the second line crews and the captains to make sure that that's happening in as safe a way as possible. And let me see if I got any more announcements. I think that's it, so let's move to questions.
All right, I'll start with Jennifer.
Yes, any changes to the Irish parade? You said that there were some slots that needed to be
Sure.
filled.
Yeah, that decision has still not yet been made at this time. We're at Tuesday. I think with Crew of Boo, it was ultimately Friday that decision was made. It is going to be later in the process, hopefully not that late, but it has not yet been made. OPSC and the NOPD are waiting to see how things shake out in terms of the volunteers for the detail shifts. I know the last time I looked, there were shifts still remaining to be claimed. Hopefully we hit the number that we need to do this safely.
All right,
Again,
Natasha.
what day did you say you have that?
I would say Friday, no later than, but hopefully before that.
Okay, Natasha.
Can you just explain, because I know volunteers, so it's different than they go on 12-hour shifts?
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I'm happy to do that. We have what's described as a city roll during Mardi Gras parades, during the official carnival parades, the big ones that everybody's thinking about during that 2-week period. That's a city roll. That means everybody that works for NOPD is on a 12-hour shift for about 2 weeks in a row. That is separate and apart from detail shifts. When you have a special event, you as the organizer are responsible for paying officers to work a detail to come provide security for that event. And you set that rate. In collaboration with the Office of Police Secondary Employment, event organizers are able to determine what the pay rate's going to be. They offer that, and officers are able to, at their discretion, volunteer to take those OT shifts or not, basically. It's explicitly not something that we can in any way order them to do, right? The incentive is just the pay and their interest or willingness to do it. And once that number has been determined, once we see how many have signed up, then we can see what the bandwidth is, how many officers are going to be there, and that's when we are able to make decisions about what's safe for the route.
And is that the same thing that's going on with the second line?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, it's the same problem in a different, slightly different construction, but it's the same thing, yeah.
Meg, you have anything?
It's the same as my two colleagues. Do you know the number of volunteer shifts that need to be filled?
I do not off the top of my head.
Like, is it dozens or is it?
I don't want to guesstimate, but later on, if you follow up with me, I'm happy to email you that. I just have to look it up.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, we'll let Natasha run.
Yeah, just what would the possibilities be if those shifts are not filled? What might happen?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too far into hypotheticals, but if you look back at the Crew of Boo, it was just a matter of altering the route by a couple of blocks. Again, as with all this, we're not trying to hurt anybody's good time. We're not trying to shut anybody down. We're just trying to make sure that we have the resources available to meet any safety needs that would arise. So the potential would really just be for alterations to the route, not a total shutdown or anything like that.
Yeah, and just to follow up, yeah.
Sure.
So, our state, I'm sorry.
It's Women's Day.
There you go. That's a positive way of looking at it.
We love you. I call them.
Okay.
Would state police or any other entities, the sheriff's office or any other that
Well,
will be called in to help out?
This is, again, sort of a different situation than a city role where it's a formal city event where we and our state and local partners are staffing it. When it's a special event that is sponsored by event organizers, an outside group or local business or whatever, that falls under a different set of things. So it's not a situation where the city is, just by way of our process, by the way that we work with our local and federal partners, we're not necessarily going to call in the state police or anything like that. These events are ultimately on the shoulders of those who are organizing them, right? The event organizers have the responsibility to set those detail rates and to staff for security as needed.
Okay, I'll be there.
Yes, all right, you've been waiting long enough.
Oh, the second line restriction stuff, as I appreciate it, and speaking with some of the folks, actually predate this administration. The agreement about how many.
Correct. That,
elements-
my understanding is that goes back to at least 2017. It's not something that's been enforced in extreme, in an intense way, but it's been on the books for a while. It's not something that we created.
Got it. And so now the enforcement comes.
Correct.
However, the enforcement comes after the mayor has ridden in some of the largest second lines this season.
True.
And some of the groups, some of these socializing pleasure clubs feel as if that is unfair.
Sure.
Feel as if they're not necessarily being signaled out, but if the mayor can ride in these community sidewalk step or second line parade
Mhm.
floats, and she was on a float with the family and everything else.
Sure.
Beautiful. You got video.
Well, Yeah, no, let me,
that can happen.
I'm happy to speak to that. So,
Then
the-
why
the-
is this happening?
right, the distinction that you're looking at here is a difference of the calendar, right? So the parades that the mayor was in, the Mardi Gras parades, all of this, none of this happens in a vacuum, right? All of it is cumulative, all of it affects one another. We're now in a situation where our public safety responders, NOPD, we're working 12-hour shifts for about 2 weeks in a row. We have to find a way to drop the pressure on them somewhere, somehow, right? As we're well aware, there's an intense crime surge that we're still struggling to deal with. The demands of parade season have been, what they were. And as we've said, we've had an ultimately successful and safe season. But given the nature of the calendar, we're on the other side of Mardi Gras now. We have to find somewhere to alleviate that pressure. And that means that as the calendar goes on, and Chief Ferguson said this, for the duration of the season, we are going to be looking at enforcing those restrictions that have been in place. Now, I recognize the frustration that people have with that. And, unfortunately, it's certainly understandable. But again, we're not trying to single anybody out, and we're really not trying to be unfair with this. We're really trying to deal with the resources that we have available, both in terms of manpower and in terms of time. So the calendar's been a factor here.
And the second line season lasts all the way until the summer, so are you saying that the heavier enforcement will take place now?
I'm saying it's going to be a factor for the remainder of the season. And as I've said kind of throughout this, if you've heard Chief Ferguson say, it really comes down to the bandwidth that we have available and dealing with the reality of the boots on the ground, right? To the degree that we have officers available, be that by detail or by officers that are just on shift, we're going to do everything we can to serve as many people as we can, as safely as we can.
Final question on this. As I appreciated, the bandwidth can be expanded if these crews pay additional dollars for elements for that parade. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
Yes, so the parade can
That's-
still be a size that you want it to be,
If-
as long as you're willing to.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the I think, frustrations that people have, or where we get into some conflict or some frustration, is folks will apply for a permit with X amount, and then when it comes time to roll, they're at X plus Y, right? It becomes larger. And that is something that NOPD or public safety on the ground have to deal with that day, right? And they've got a great track record of doing that. They do it very well. But what we're trying to ask in a spirit of goodwill, right? Because again, we don't want to shut anybody down. We don't want to ruin anybody's good time. We're just trying to make this as safe as we can. So if you can make that sure that the way you roll is reflected on your permit, you're going to be good to go. And if you want to roll bigger, then you need to bake that in on the front end when you're applying for your permit, right?
Got it.
Okay.
The requirements aren't very easy to find on the NOLA.gov site. Can I request that? Can you send that out?
Yes, I can send that to you, and we can try and reorganize the website if it's not as helpful as it could be. No, it's fine, that's fine.
Last couple of
Yep.
days. Oh,
Yep. Bill, based on the preliminary numbers, it looks like visitors for Mardi Gras this year were down about 10 or 15% from 2020. How does that compare with the city's expectations?
I think we are ultimately tremendously satisfied with the way that Mardi Gras went down this year. Now, I don't have the access to the specific numbers that you're talking about in terms of the last 2 years, but I will say anecdotally, it felt like Mardi Gras was back. That's what we all wanted to have happen. That's what That's frankly what we needed. So we're very grateful to have it happen. The fact that the numbers might not track exactly with where we were 2 years ago, I think shocks no one, given what we've been through the last 24 months. But what we saw, the goodwill and the participation we saw, not just from visitors, which is always great to have them, but our residents really were able to come out and force in a big way this year. And that was huge for everybody. We're grateful to see it.
Meg? I was just gonna piggyback on that. Could these groups get private security to fill in where NOPD would be, or no?
Well, so that's what the details are. The details are the organizers are paying NOPD officers to come and provide
I'm
security.
talking about, Vincent, completely separate company, private security, and
Sure.
pay them if they have the people willing to work, or no, does it have to be NOPD?
You know, I don't want to answer that off the top of my head because I'm not sure exactly what the regulations are on that. I know that our, traditionally, we go through the Office of Police Secondary Employment. For larger scale events, there may be additional considerations, but I think that would have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis with NOPD special events.
So when someone applies for a permit
Mhm.
and the day comes that their second line is going to take off.
Sure.
Is there a city official that comes, like a permitting person that comes and makes sure that everything is in order and signs them off?
Yeah, I mean,
Is that under the police department?
Well, I know that NOPD is out there, given the size of the events, NOPD will be out there at the beginning, and very often somebody from One Stop or from Code Enforcement will be there as well. I think the actual staff on the ground can vary depending on what the event is, but regardless, there are city staff that are there on the ground when it steps off to kind of understand the scale and the scope of it. And as I said, very often, for good or for ill, these things get bigger than they were on paper when they started, and that's something that we're used to dealing with. But that's also why we're trying to have these conversations on the front before it's happened. So it's not Sunday when you're stepping off, it's the Wednesday before where NOPD can sit down and say, here's the bandwidth that we have available, what are you guys rolling out? Just so we all know what we're dealing with.
So how do we get to this point where if there was an inspector or a permitting person or someone from the NOPD, why didn't they enforce this before?
Meaning going back the last 5, 6, 7 years? Well, because as we've said, we're not trying to ruin this. We're not trying to be punitive in any kind of way, right? And in the past, we have done everything we can to let it slide and try and keep it as safe as we can. Where we are now, the realities on the ground are different. The bandwidth that we have is different. The staffing levels that we have are different. And frankly, the environment is different, right? Given the nature of the spike in criminal activity, we have to be very smart and very intentional about how we're deploying our resources. And that means that we can't be as cool as we once were about stuff like that.
I ask because when we do Mardi Gras parades, there is an actual inspector that goes
Sure.
and checks all
And
of the parades,
again,
and
with
it's
the
through city.
the Mardi Gras parades are a city role. That's, I kind of explained the distinction between those. The Mardi Gras parades is officially in carnival season. That's a city role that falls under a certain set of protocol. Special events, private special events, are a different beast.
What does enforcement actually look like? Would it be a fine? Would it be stopping?
That's an excellent question, because what we're trying to do is, as we did throughout the pandemic with the masking requirements, with the vaccination requirements, we're not trying to be punitive. We're trying to be much more carrot than stick on this. The objective is not to bust people. The objective is not to stifle the culture in any kind of way. Enforcement looks like this. Enforcement looks like 5 days before NOPD sits down with you and says, here's what we've got, here's what the expectations are. You didn't see anything this weekend where people were getting yanked off floats or ticketed. We're not really trying to disrupt things. We're just trying to work with event organizers so that everybody's able to have as safe a time as possible, as safely as possible.
Where do you stand with the sanitation at this point? Have contracts been put out?
You mean the RFP?
Proposals?
Yeah.
What about returning to 2 a week?
Sure.
2 day a week pickups and recycling?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great updates to offer on that. The RFP, I'd hope to be able to come out today and say it's gone, it's on the street. It's still not. It's hung up, just various internal stuff. They're trying to get it out the door, but that has not happened yet. As soon as it does, I will be the happiest guy in the room, and I will call you and let everybody know. But short of that, twice-a-week pickup has not yet resumed. Sanitation Department is not yet confident that they can do it consistently. Right now, both major groups, Metro and Richards, do not have adequate resources to really catch up quickly after a holiday event, as we saw in the last week. So until we're satisfied that they're able to do that, we're not yet ready to put them back on 2 a day. That's just kind of where we're at.
And recycling?
No updates on that at this point. Okay? All right. Thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate you.
Send me that big vote.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and send me please the number of slots still open for
Got it.